Hey gang, I think I hear lightning and thunder outside. So I'm looking at The Outsiders, issue 27 and 28 from 1987. Man, that's some good thunder. Uh, Drawn by Erik Larsen. He drew and inked this issue. He was inked by Farmer in this last issue, Mark Farmer, and Al Gordon did the inks for this cover. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with Erik Larsen now. He was my favorite Spider-Man artist as a child. He was the first comic book artist I knew by name and would copy his poses and listen to his interviews talking about how he would draw Spider-Man and exaggerate his features to exaggerate the spider-like qualities of the character. And he's such a boomer. I think I fell out of love with him when he tried to make fun of John Malin to show how woke he is, and people just tweeted Erik Larsen's comics featuring a child raping another child. He really did that, and then he tried to say, "Hey, come on! The context of that is I'm commenting on violence in television." Yeah, Erik, why did you draw that? So yeah. I loved his Spider-Man run. I may love him even more than Todd McFarlane. Controversy, but I don't like much of Erik Larsen's new stuff. And at this point in his career, this is pre-Spider-Man. You can tell he's very young and he's still like working out his style. But he has a very cartoony element to things. Like you could see he'd sometimes have. I want to try to find an example. Well, there's a good example right there. Like he'd push everything to the max and make like the evil expressions as cartoony as possible. He'd have like a big goofy, sad expression on Metamorpho when he's caught. These are just thoroughly okay-ish 90s books. Like, not everything is magically good just because it came from the 80s or 90s. Like, problem number one is The Outsiders had too many dang characters, 4 guys and 4 girls on a team. Problem two is it's some sort of weird event they were tying it into. So, I guess they did an okay job of giving the heroes like some bad guys to fight that were in their own little corner of the DC universe while the big Manhunter, event was going on. I just couldn't follow much about the characters. Not some of the there were little things done to even in a book where I'm not following it that well and I'm not getting into it. Like they take the time to say that Windfall and Atomic Knight, they kind of like each other. They might have a little something going. Geoforce, he's kind of frustrated because he's a big patriotic guy and he's lost his country in all of the craziness recently. Looker was the most developed character in this issues, where she used to be an ugly woman and then sort of a magic statue transformed her and gave her these powers, so she became a looker. But then her husband was kind of freaked out because that wasn't the woman he married, and he left her. And there's she goes on this sweet arc where she used to have no confidence in herself. She has confidence in herself as Looker. Then when she loses her powers and returns to normal, she's able to kind of heal and go back to her husband because she's learned something about herself beyond just her looks, and that was kind of sweet. But really, these were just okay-ish comics where the big giant cast, nobody really had a chance to shine that much. And Erik Larsen at this stage, I think he was still sorting out the kinks. My favorite thing about him is how cartoony he was back then. But this one especially, it just felt like he had to crank it out to pencil and ink it. I think he did a little better with another inker working with him. And you can even see things like he did exaggerate the jawline to the absolute limit, and he do things like this in his Spider-Man run later for Marvel. But I think it was sort of like he learned how to control it and exaggerate the things that needed to be exaggerated. Like Spider-Man gets to be exaggerated, but a lot of other things get to be a little bit more normalish. Now, actually, because these are just mediocre comics, my favorite things were actually Dick Giordano's comments trying to sell you on other series in DC and some of the beautiful ads from the time. So the more I've seen from Dick Giordano, the more respect I've had for him. I've liked every comic from DC I've seen where he was at the helm for DC, and he was an inker. He was inking this whole time. So both of these letters are kind of examples of why you should try to collect the old comics if you can, because these get left out so much of the later books, and they're so interesting. You learn so much. You get pumped up on all these other series. So what's beautiful about this is Dick Giordano. declaring the importance of the fans, using Star Trek while pumping you on a book. So I'm not gonna read all of it, but just a few little key quotes. There was a time when people thought fan opinion didn't count for much. I recently spent some time with a group of people who could tell you differently and how. Remember those writing campaigns fans mounted in order to bring Star Trek back in the 60s? It took a long time and a lot of begging and pleading and finger crossing, but Star Trek came back all right as a motion picture. And then he mentions the upcoming series Star Trek The Next Generation, which is kind of a weird time capsule because it's weird for me to imagine people looking forward to Star Trek The Next Generation coming out. It's kind of like I have a hard time imagining a world without Star Wars in it and people looking forward to the next Star Wars movie. I guess the closest thing to that in my lifetime is The Dark Knight, where I can like distinctly remember a pre-Dark Knight life and a post-Dark Knight life, where I can just watch and rewatch The Dark Knight and just still be happy I got to see that in theaters. It was a cool little time capsule where he gets to talk about, hey, we got to go to the to the set of the show and see all the cool things. I learned that they make the sets 90% the size of real life to make the actors look bigger. You're going to meet new characters like Data, who would become like these iconic characters. And then the point he makes is that DC is going to be doing a Star Trek book. It's going to be all new stories. It's not just going to be repeats of episodes, so you should check it out. And then he brings it back and ties it up with a nice little bow by praising the fan, the customer. We're making this effort for the same reason Paramount made its efforts to bring Star Trek back in the first place, to let the fans who've kept that flame going all these years know that we take them very seriously. Once those 6 issues are over, who knows, your response might keep DC's version of the Enterprise aloft, because, after all, we all know that no cancellation is final when it comes to the final frontier. Thank you and good afternoon. And then there's some just like really sweet, one-page ads for their different stories. They like show you the character, they show you who's working on it, they give you a little cool tagline for it. This is the Millennium event I don't know anything about. And then for the Outsiders, he did this really, really sweet discussion of Steve Ditko, who created the question. And when you think about it, Watchmen came out about 2 years before this, right? Like 1985 to 1987, thereabouts. So, and Rorschach is based on The Question. Therefore, The Question suddenly has become a hot property again. You get to do something with the character that Rorschach is based on. This is one of the most popular characters from like the hit comic of that decade, really. And so they seized a good capitalist opportunity, and Dick Giordano takes the chance to talk to you about like the roots of the character back in his early years, right after Steve Ditko creates him, and what they were trying to do to make him distinct. How he was kind of like an anti-hero before that was even like a in an age where it wouldn't be weird for a hero to kill the villains. The Question would kind of stand aside and let the villains die and not feel like it was his job to intervene to save a bunch of murderers, right? He was a pretty judgmental character influenced by Steve Ditko's objectivism. And Giordano has all these great thoughts, like how The Question is probably like a early draft of Mr. A, where Mr. A would be like Steve Ditko, like very literally working through his objectivism. He talked a little bit about the success of Blue Beetle and The Question for Charleston Comics and how they did things differently at Charleston Comics. Is that it? Charlton Comics. I don't know anything about Charlton Comics really, but he jokes that like the big two would be making fun of each other, calling each other not Brand Eck, and he would try to make Charlton like more positive, more upbeat. Yeah, I love DC. Yeah, I love Marvel. Hey, we need buy The Question. We need your money. He's being frank with the readers, and he's giving us like kind of like amusing anecdotes from his time in that earlier decade. And then beautifully, he then sets up the new Question book and why you should be excited about that. So after saying we kind of like broke ground with The Question, we did all this cool stuff with The Question, then he introduces you to the writer and the artist for the new team, Denny O'Neil. Big name, and he gets you excited for it. So what's the new Question going to be all about? It's going to be realistic and frightening for their time as the original was for its time. Denny deals with a lot of tough ahem questions head on. The violence is also depicted realistically, not choreographed. The greater realism, for my money, engages your emotions in a much stronger way. It's not a hero meets villain in a fantasy setting where dollops of surrealism get in the way of tapping your sympathies. So he's trying to sell old fans of The Question and people who liked Watchmen on this series and saying this is going to be a spiritual successor to the original question. We're going to do all this great stuff with the character. We're going to build on it. It's going to be tough and realistic and cool. That's great stuff. And then he has the writer talk about the artist and how cool the artist is. It's all selling you on more work. It's upselling you while showing their love for the craft, showing their love for the history and for people like Steve Ditko and the customer. It's just this is just an okay adventure story. Oh, there was a really sweet thing where they paid homage actually to some like old golden age characters. So Atomic Knight was like a post-crisis version of the Atomic Knights, and so they had a cool little dream sequence where he got to meet the original version of the Atomic Knights, and they thank for John Broome and Murphy Anderson, creators of the Atomic Knights. I love when they show appreciation to earlier phases of earlier generations of the industry. So Looker has her adventure. It kind of wraps up with them, feeling. I like that it gave them a chance to like feel sad and kind of grieve and mourn their losses, and then kind of like set up that maybe they'll come back, but this is a time of rest for them. They need to recoup their losses. They need to heal. They need to grieve, and maybe they'll come back in the future. But it's a appropriate like wrap up issue for a final issue of the series that actually kind of deals with some character arcs. And there's the Star Trek: The Next Generation series. Okay-ish books. Most of the class came in Giordano's like great essays setting up other books that I actually want to go check out. That's the other amazing thing is there's so much shelf life value to these. Like I picked this up 40 years later, and then I can read that and say, Dick Giordano's selling me on going to check out Star Trek: The Last Generation comic from the 1980s. How about that? They're not, in contrast to Marvel, who are weaponizing Stan Lee's letters to lecture the fans about offering criticism to their initiative. I don't know. I'm kind of past the point where I feel like we can fix the contemporary industry. I feel like they need to. There's a concept in economics called creative destruction, where their companies may just need to like fail so that they can learn from their mistakes and try again with better people at the helm with those characters. But old comics are the way to go. The reason I'm reading old comics is if you want to get into comics, you need to just read a bunch of comics for cheap so you don't break the bank. Find what you like and pursue that. Otherwise, the Outsider is an example of something where I'd kind of read it, I kind of enjoy myself, but I wouldn't go hunting for a bunch more of it. Because if I didn't like super enjoy this, like what would I enjoy like every issue of it? Maybe, maybe not. So this is what would be an example of a bum lead. But even in this, because I got it for like 50 cents, $1 at Goodwill, then I get a lead of go check out this stuff. Go check out The Question. Go check out Star Trek: The Next Generation. You can't go wrong buying old comics for cheap. You're going to find something eventually hidden in the rough. You're going to find some diamonds. That's it. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell to receive notifications. Check out my Subscribe Star. Thank you, subscribers on Subscribe Star. Thank you, Super Chat donators. I love you guys. And I'll catch you later.